Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of Blake's Astrology Corner. I am your host, Blake Kelly, the lovely Gemini Sun, Scorpio Moon, Libra Rising. And I am very excited today to have on one of my very close friends and also I would say, maybe one of my friend guides in this astrology journey with me, cosmic cousins, Jeff Hinshaw. I met them last year, actually on social media as I was making a journey potentially to the Pacific Northwest, and now I'm actually up here, and they have moved on to somewhere else. So we we could actually get into that, but before I get into that long-winded story, Jeff, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm being reminded that, was it the Sagittarius new moon when I picked you up from the airport?
Yes, it
Or was it the
is.
Gemini full moon? I know we were in season
It
and we
was
went
the
straight to
Gemini. Yeah, or sorry, it was the Sagittarius new moon.
right. We're Sagittarius rising in our composite chart. We're gathering on the Aries full moon. We met in person for the first time on the Sagittarius new moon. We have a lot of fire and air going between us, and we watched the sunset like within 5 minutes of meeting each other. I took you out to the gorge.
We
So I,
literally, yeah, we literally hopped in a car and we're like, oh, want to go on a hike? And then just like witness the like maybe the best sunset that's ever existed.
it was incredible. The sky was just like neon pink, and you really slowed me down. Like you really wanted to watch the sunset for like, I don't know, like what seemed like 10 or 15 minutes. So thank you for that. Just honoring your Libra rising and happy rising self time of year. We're in Libra season when we're recording this, and this is the morning of the Aries full moon. So it feels particularly alive and awakened for us to be connecting in this way. And thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to invite Jeff on here is because I believe that they have like a very lovely, interesting queer perspective on the asteroid goddesses. And I feel like there's a lot of different amazing, research with Dimitri George and all of all of that. But I also felt very called to explore that further with Jeff's workshops. And over the past 4 months, each month, I have been exploring each of the main four asteroid goddesses, Ceres, Pallas Athena, Juno, and Vesta. And
Mm.
so I just thought it would be like a good episode to come on here to kind of talk about, what I got from it, what I thought was interesting, what, how Jeff relates to their own Astro Goddess placements and kind of how that mixes together with our composite chart. And this kind of be an educational opportunity for people to get to know the archetypes a little better, but also just have some casual conversation about it.
Yeah. I think it could be nice for me to just start with what my big three is. I'm an Aquarius sun with a Virgo moon and Aquarius rising. And my Virgo Aquarius combo feels particularly aligned with asteroid energy to me. And this came to me when we had back-to-back Aquarius full moons in Leo season of 2021. So it was the second Aquarius full moon at 29 degrees of Aquarius. So we were like right about to enter into Virgo season. And so there's something about this combo for me when I was tuning into it that resonated with the asteroids. And I think for one, the asteroids they have this intergalactic energy about them because they're comets coming into our solar system that are caught up in the asteroid belt. So they come in this very cosmic perspective, and you can think of the star card in the tarot as a depiction of the asteroids. And then Virgo very much is connected to the archetypes of the asteroids because they're about tending to the earth, the connection that we have to. Well, we'll get into the four different asteroids and how they might all be connected to Virgo. So for me, working with the asteroids, they create this certain resonance with the rest of your chart that help to communicate how to bring the soul purpose in your chart forward in ways that are, I think, very practical. I do think the asteroids are here to offer us insight around our offerings, around our creative gifts, and it offers vocabulary around things that many of us are interested in the astrology community as creatives, healers, mystics. So if you don't know the asteroids in your chart, they will give you a new perspective on ways to work with the energy within your chart. And it does expand your awareness. So I think that's the best place to start when getting to know the asteroids, is looking at the bigger picture of the way that the four main asteroids work together. And so one of my tools that I use as an astrologer is the relationship that I've cultivated with the tarot. And so in my own practice, I have connected the four asteroids to the four queens in the tarot. And this can offer a very visual representation of sparking a relationship with the asteroids from an intuitive place. And so this is unique to my own practice. You could work with different cards in the tarot that connect you to the asteroids. But for me, Ceres is the Queen of Pentacles. Juno is the Queen of Cups, Pallas is the Queen of Swords, and Vesta is the Queen of Wands. That's already allowing us to connect into the elementations that these four asteroids might hold. And that is a great launching pad. If you're not familiar with tarot, the cool thing about the four main asteroids is they have other ways to categorize themselves. Another way is connecting the four asteroids to the four corners of the chart. And so Pallas is the midheaven, connected to public appearance and putting one's voice out into the world. And we were even talking about earlier, is like being seen in the public. Ceres is connected to the IC. It's connected to themes of home and family and grounding. Juno, the descendant, is partnership, and Vesta is waking up to one's soul purpose as an individual. So there's these four corners. There's also the four queens. And so you could even put the four queens out in that same diamond shape. And then the final, like, holistic big picture is it's often considered the four aspects of the feminine archetype, which is Ceres, the mother, Vesta, the daughter, or Pallas, the daughter, born from Jupiter's head, Vesta, the sister, the Vestal Virgin, sisterhood, and then Juno would be wife or partner. So there's, I think, getting to know them as a group, this is the Aquarian side of them, it is important, and that can help you to kind of start to put in the more Virgo details to get to know them on an individual level, but they do work as a team. That's my understanding.
Yeah, and the way that I started with exploring them all is, I started with Ceres, and Ceres, I think, is one of the most predominantly placed asteroid goddesses in my chart, because I have Ceres in Cancer, which, very much, as you said, kind of can be associated with home. But at the same time, because I'm a Libra rising, it's like right conjunct my midheaven. So it's an interesting sort of paradox for me between like this idea of getting to know, family stuff for me, but at the same time, it being like very public at the same time.
Yeah, you have a lot of that kind of contradiction in your chart.
Yeah, because like even as you talked about that, it just makes me laugh because I have Juno in my first house, which is typically associated with the descendant, and then I have Vesta, which you talked about being on the ascendant, in my seventh house. So being a Libra rising, I feel like it's sort of already kind of paradoxical, but then I feel like when I've added that where my asteroid goddesses are placed in my chart, and it already kind of still feels like it like a heightened version of that, or like a bigger awareness of that.
Which I think is already pretty inherent in your birth chart, even without the asteroids. So that's why turning the asteroids on in your chart and getting to know where they are, it will further emphasize a storyline that maybe was already taking place in your chart. Or I have had the asteroids included in a chart, and it actually will offer a completely new and radical storyline that really activates someone in a new direction. And so if you are watching this right now and you're not familiar with the asteroids in your chart, you're probably drawn to it in this moment because you're ready to activate and awaken these new archetypes and incorporate them into your life. You might even start to feel like a buzzy sensation. That's been my relationship to the asteroids, is they have this kind of buzzy quality, like when you get the chills almost, where they're kind of magical. They're like,
Yeah.
I'd say they like sprinkle cosmic crumbs into your chart, like little clues on your journey.
I think Ceres was the one that for me, like I felt like I had like a very deep like connection and continue to have a deep connection with. I think the storyline and the between like loss of innocence, between what it really means to transition from, with Persephone going below ground and then above ground, and then Ceres's sort of like grief around that loss. Like I think that that sort of story arc is very prominent in my early childhood life, and it continues to shape the way that I feel like I understand myself and I understand how it is that I'm trying to show up in the world, and like the way that I want to offer the type of, support and the type of care now to people around, I think specifically grief. And I think that's kind of played out a lot in my life. So I think
Yeah,
that
your
series has
name,
been great. Say,
these themes of series, the loss of innocence and grief, and what my mind's coming to is the collective experience that we all had during the global pandemic. And this could be a cool entrance point into understanding series, because sometimes getting to know the collective story of the planets and asteroids can really activate or open up an understanding to them. And the Saturn Pluto conjunction in January of 2020, if you're including the asteroids in these major conjunctions or transits, you really can see how they are very prominent. And so Saturn and Pluto aligned in Capricorn January 12th, 2020, and Ceres was right there, I think within a degree of the Saturn Pluto conjunction. So that conjunction takes place only once every 36 years, and it is associated with pandemics, epidemics, war, a great restructuring, Saturn and Pluto. And so there was something too about this conjunction that incorporated the loss of innocence, which check, that happened. Tremendous amount of grief, the connection to the health of the collective. Series is very much connected to health and nutrition, which a lot of these themes you can feel how Ceres is connected to Virgo. So might be considered a co-ruler to Virgo. But that is when I saw that conjunction had Ceres as a part of it, it allowed me a new way of connecting to that conjunction that felt more practical, more grounded, more focused on health and healing.
mm, mm. Yeah, I mean that definitely speaks to my experience through that part of time in life. And I think while that was happening, it was also my Saturn return. So I feel like I was getting, the double whammy of it all. But and obviously that was opposing my series as well. So I really feel that story arc and storyline of series, and the story arc of the relationship between mother and daughter, or mother and kid, and sort of like how Persephone was either interpretation, like branching out and like wanting to experience what they wanted to experience in life, or being taken away, right? There's different interpretations. Was really helpful for me to during that time for me to like process all of that. And I think that one of the reasons why I was so interested in exploring that, and like why I'm interested in talking to you about this on the podcast, is just because it was so, I think it just helped me deepen my own understanding of self even deeper through the chart. So um I think that I would just say I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. I think one of my parts of my practice that I love when cultivating a relationship with the archetypes is having some sort of practice with building an altar, which I would very much connect to Ceres. If we're continuing to connect to Ceres as an archetype right now, and energy is very much our relationship to the earth that can be quite ritualistic. So building altars, or the image of a wheel is coming to mind. Like I know of a friend of mine who has Ceres conjunct their sun and rising. And that's a part of their practice. They actually photograph like these beautiful kind of flower arranged mandalas. And when I found out they were a Ceres rising, it just it made sense to me. It like clicked into place because honoring the wheel of the year is one of Ceres themes,
Mm,
which we all do as astrologers, really. I mean, in some capacity, maybe some of us more than others. So Ceres might speak to the way in which you are honoring the wheel of the year in your own practice as a practicing astrologer, um, but maybe in a more earthy, tangible way.
mm,
So you having Ceres in your 10th house, I would imagine that part of your astrology practice is helping connect people to the ritual of understanding the cycles of nature and the wheel of the year.
mm. Yeah, I do feel that there's a lot in my practice that gets talked about around how people are trying to move through a sense of cycles or changes in their life and their own uncertainty around those cycles. And I think that it's also around my own issues that I have, right? With like my resistance to cyclical change. And
Mhm.
how my own I don't know, my own deepening of that cycle is also helping me guide or, help others be aware of that cycle as well. Um,
Yeah.
and how I can, I think reorient people to their perspective on how time works and like how we're moving through different parts of our lives, and holding ourselves with like deep loving compassion for that, and being able to really, I feel like a lot of times there's, you know people, I've had readings and I've met people that when I've provided that kind of, support, it's always been around how are we moving through our own cycles of, it tends to be more inner sometimes than outer. It's not just like, oh, I'm changing jobs or whatever. It's more about like, how am I trying to reorient myself towards my own sense of loss or my own sense of grief or my own sense of, like the things that need to be let go of or be honored for dying, rather than it just being about like a cyclical change of external.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that this is so much connected to Ceres invitation for you and your chart is processing your grief through work, through tending to your day-to-day tasks. And so a question you might ask yourself in tandem with your exploration with Ceres is, what am I deeply working on at this moment? What am I tending to? What am I cultivating in my life? How might I be more gentle and nurturing with this process? And how is this helping me to move through grief in a way that is productive and in alignment with cultivating new life and new ways of being? So there is this underworld part of Ceres archetype, losing one's daughter to the underworld, Persephone, but tending to the earth. So there's a sense of like creative power that comes from this process. So wherever Ceres is in your chart, it's likely a part of your chart where you are have grief, but you're also hardworking
Mm,
as well.
mm. Yeah, I
So
think.
I feel Scorpio resonating with Ceres too. Both Virgo and Scorpio feel prominent. Yeah.
Well, as someone with, with some Scorpio placements, and some eighth house placements, but
And the moon in Scorpio, that has a similar feel to Ceres as a mother, you know?
I've
Yeah.
I've always been very comfortable with this like idea of the underworld, and this is like, not to say, I've just been always been very comfortable with it. And before I found astrology or before I even understood like what any of that meant, I was like, it feels so comfortable to me, but sometimes it's like I also have to realize almost like in an inverse way that I can't stay there. Like that I can't stay in the underworld and I have to come up. And I think that that's also part of like the, I don't know, the paradox for me is like, it's like not that I'm uncomfortable with it, is I think sometimes I get too comfortable with it. and I have to remember that, like, there's sun, and I can go and experience the things that aren't like the grief, and the things that aren't the heaviness, because I think I'm so familiar with it that it feels second nature to me, that I have to be like, okay, like, here's the nut time to transition.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good awareness, because we can live there, we can dwell there. And Ceres is about honoring the whole wheel, not just winter, but also spring and summer and fall. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that you have Ceres and Sagittarius, right, on your Saturn and Uranus, if I'm remembering correctly.
Ceres is, we could say, the bridge builder between Saturn and Uranus in my chart, but they're all within 5 degrees of each other. And I think as a double Aquarius, I work with both Saturn and Uranus as my rulers, especially since they're conjunct in my chart. And then Virgo moon looking to Ceres, which is also hanging out with these two rulers. So those three placements in my chart, I'm always thinking about and checking in with. They're in my 11th house. And it very much, during my Saturn return is when I launched Cosmic Cousins, my offering as an astrologer. This is also all hanging out with the galactic center. So I have Saturn, Ceres, Uranus, and Sag with the galactic center in the 11th house. And that is very much me as a teacher and astrologer, and just creating community around this very cosmic practice. But yes, Siri, I'm very hardworking. I show up every day to this practice, and it is a way that I am, tending to my own grief. So, affirmation I might have for Ceres is, I transform grief through the cultivation of my craft. And yeah, what an honor it is to be able to be in this process with Ceres. It's like there's a deep tending here.
Yeah.
I was actually working with the land too. Like, it can be very literal. During my Saturn return, I didn't just only launch Cosmic Cousins, but I was also living in a community on the Big Island of Hawaii, uh, learning how to have more sustainable practices. And I was actually working in the compost. There's a community of about 150 people, and only two of us were part of the compost team, and I was one of the two. And I also took the trash to the trash center once a week, and the recycling. And Ceres is a compost pile, and that's literally what I was doing. I was literally had these rain boots on, stomping eggs into the compost and turning this giant mulch pile of compost twice a week.
Hmm.
And speaking of the sun, it needs the sun to heat it up so that it can transform. It's this like deep, dark place, but you were talking about like needing sun in your life. We need the sun to help that process
Hmm.
turn. Yeah. And you have to turn the compost too. If you don't, the sun can heat it up so much that it combusts and explodes everywhere. So you have to be turning it a few times a week. It's meant to be tended to.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you might not be able to use the compost. And so that daily work of showing up to your body, to your craft, this is like getting things moving so that it doesn't stagnate. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the affirmations that, if I'm remembering, that you had as part of the workshop for Ceres, for at least for my chart, it was like, by tending to my philosophical studies, or by tending to my public reputation, I'm actually nurturing my, like, inner mother. And
Mm,
that really felt like it spoke to me, because in a lot of my own, like, healing work around, like, a lot of people call it reparenting, or whatever you happens to be, about providing that kind of like nurturing love to yourself. I feel that sometimes my public work ends up being the thing that helps me do it the most, which feels, again, kind of paradoxical in some ways. But I've that sort of affirmation has really actually guided me in, like, that constant tending.
mm. It's so heartfelt. Like, I just feel it. Like, there's a lot of emotion here for me when I think about you just like tending to the soil of your your public appearance, or whatever the little affirmation was. But yeah, in the workshop, the 4-part workshop, there's little kind of Mad Lib fill in the blank affirmations for you to get to know your own asteroids in your birth chart. And so that's specific to your birth chart, having Ceres in the 10th house. Yes. So the workshops aren't on my website right now. I've kind of retired them because I released them 2 years ago. But if you really did want to take, anyone listening to this, if you really did want to take the 4-part workshop, you can send me an email. I still have them. But I initially began to explore the asteroids because I noticed on Time Passages Pro that you could turn the asteroids on in your chart. And then there's not a whole lot written up on them, but I included them in my chart and started meditating on them and really felt their power and significance. So then, yeah, I turned to Demetra George's book on the asteroids. And just as in most times when I read something, I'm always wanting to elaborate on it and make it more tangible and useful from my own queer perspective, my own perspective as someone who's interested in building a bridge between spirituality and social justice. So I love everything that I've learned from my teachers, and I'm always wanting to progress it forward so that we continue to grow these archetypes in a way that is inclusive for all beings. And I hope that whoever engages with my work will do the same and continue to evolve these practices so this vocabulary is inclusive of a world that we want to co-collaborate and create together. But yeah, so Demetra George and Time Passages Pro and my own exploration of like building altars and working with this energy and meditating on them. Like when I did the Ceres workshop, I spent an entire month in ritual with Ceres before recording the workshop. So it's like going on daily walks with Ceres, observing my life through the lens of Ceres. And then mystical things start to happen. Like a package showed up at my door that wasn't meant for me. But when I reached out to the sender, they're like, oh, just keep it. I'll send this package to the actual person, but no need for you to send it back to me. You can keep it. And inside the package were like all of these different items that you might associate with Ceres. You know, it's like all these things that helped me tend to my own health and my own home. And then I also found a picture of what appeared to look like Ceres. It was a woman or a person with a sickle in a field, this beautiful laminated painting that was in the library free box in my neighborhood. You know, just like these certain synchronicities will occur when you dedicate and bring your awareness to the archetypes. And there's a very magical component to the way that I cultivate a relationship with these energies. And I do it all with the intention, not only to get to know myself better in my own chart, but as a way for me when I'm working with someone one-on-one or when I'm working with students in like a workshop or a class setting, that I have these own experiences to draw from so that I can be in transmission with receiving the information that might guide someone towards not only greater healing in their own life, but creating a greater ripple effect of healing in the lives of those people that they're touching through whatever their offerings or services are. I mean, there's so much healing needed on the planet right now. And for me, I'm a messenger for people so that they can realign themselves with their truth so that we can make this world a more healing and beautiful place to be on. So that's what drives me and fuels me every day is like, I don't know. I'm not trying to go and like work for a corporation and just kind of make money and, you know, whatever. I think a lot of us astrologers, like, all are coming from this place of wanting to make the world a better place. We can sometimes forget and get into this very like intellectual, cerebral place. And I do think the asteroids again can ground us in ways that we can bring healing to others. We feel that with Ceres. I'm curious if we're going to connect him with any of the other asteroids.
Well, I think actually that what you were talking about is like maybe a good transition of Pallas, because when you were talking about the bridge of like bringing healing to people around us and having that reverberate through how they work, I felt that was very Pallas on your midheaven in Scorpio.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I felt Pallas took hold there and kind of was like, okay, my turn to talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Pallas is connected to the air element. We said the Queen of Swords is the daughter of Jupiter. And it encourages us both as individuals and also a collective, Pallas, to fiercely sharpen our tools of discernment and communication so that we can step forward boldly in the name of justice and to share hidden wisdom, esoteric wisdom, which the asteroids are very esoteric. Esoteric, like one of the definitions we could say for being esoteric is information that is not shared or communicated about or understood by mass culture.
Mm.
So astrology is also esoteric, but in that um, community of astrology, the asteroids are another layer of being esoteric. And I think it kind of is like the nesting doll, which is the one of the images for Cancer that came forward when we were doing a zodiac emoji project for Cancer emoji, is this nesting doll. But there's these layers of esotericism, and Pallas is the deliverer of those messages, has the ability to share information that might be considered occult, while also using that esoteric and occult wisdom in the name of justice, in the name of equality for all people. And so there's a declaration with Pallas around truth. And I think esoteric practices are a declaration of truth, but we also need to make sure that it is not bypassing the realities of the world that we live on. So you might start to feel Pallas is connected to Libra a bit. There is this justice and balance that I have found comes forward with Pallas. And it's interesting, as we record this, the Sun and Pallas are conjunct in Libra at this moment in time, across from this Aries full moon. Yeah, but my mind and my words are powerful allies, might be an affirmation we use for Pallas. Piercing through the veil of illusion, I say that's like the little tagline that I've channeled for Pallas. The glyph for Pallas is a diamond spear that looks like Venus's glyph, but instead of a circle, it's a diamond, and then it has the cross of matter. So there's this kind of like, quote unquote, if we want to use gendered terms, feminine quality of manifestation, which is the cross of matter, but then hard edges, maybe a bit more masculine in its ability to convey. So androgynous is like a key word we might use for Pallas.
Yeah, when so Pallas is the second workshop I took, and I took an order of Jeff's recommendations. And something, I have Pallas conjunct the Sun in Gemini, and something that really connected with me around that is, like I did speech in high school. It was like an activity that I did about like performing and speaking to persuasion and speaking to and like using words to craft activism. And I felt so deeply connected to that I like joined a speech team in college. And my entire like, throughout 4 years was about meticulously crafting language around activism and social justice. And I was talking about inequities and like institutional racism within police, like back in 2008, when that was like not a conversation being had. And I was talking about anti-choice legislation that was like sweeping state legislations, and like all of this stuff that is now I feel very prominent in the news was very not at the time. And like I felt very compelled to craft, language and craft speeches based on that. And then I also became a TV journalist afterwards, and using my words to try to educate the public around what needs to be heard.
Yeah.
And trying to be that gatekeeper in some ways of like what information really needs to be dispersed to people. um
Mm.
and I've always felt very connected to that. And so when I took the workshop and when you talked about Pallas, it really lit up in me. Like I was like, oh, I am a Libra rising, so in some ways there is an orientation towards social justice, but like I feel like with Pallas on my sun, it just felt like I was like, oh, like like this really deepens my connection to my like fierceness around how I feel called to
Mhm.
stand up to social injustice and to ways that our world does not help include everyone in the picture and also include the equity that needs to be there.
Yeah. So yeah, again, you're offering an example of how having Pallas in your chart, seeing Pallas in your chart furthers the storyline of what you are already sensing about your Libra rising, but then drives the message home even more because it's Pallas with your sun. It's so much about your purpose and the light that you shine out to the world. And I remember we were talking on the phone. This was even before we met in person, but I maybe it was the first time you had really started looking at the asteroids in your chart. And I was just kind of sharing a little bit, but I was like, oh, Pallas with the sun, that makes so much sense. Physical perspective of what I've noticed about Pallas. And I think, something with the sun sign or the rising sign or the moon, perhaps we might see it more in a physical way, like in someone's appearance. Um, but the person that's coming to mind is Abraham Lincoln, I believe, has Sun conjunct Pallas. Kept freezing, so I wasn't sure if you were there. There's something. Abraham Lincoln is someone I come to for Pallas, not only in the roles that they played as a leader. I think Pallas can very much connect us to leadership, being connected being tall and having like a presence is very Pallas to me. Maybe even like thinner features, that with like sharper edges and just kind of having like a striking appearance. And this was actually, so when I found out you had Pallas of the Sun, it made sense on like a physical level too.
Mm-hmm.
And this was before I even knew how tall you actually were. I didn't know how tall you were from like just meeting you as a like floating head online. But I already felt like your Pallas presence, and then meeting you in person, I was like, oh my God, you're like a foot taller than me.
Yeah, it's the first thing that people say to me when they meet me. It's just like it's the instant reaction. They're like, "You're so tall." And it's funny because even if I've met them and like I've known them for so long, every time I see them, people will say that. They're like, "You're so tall." And I'm like, "I know." Um
So there's something around like even just your soul's like agreement to incarnate in the body that you're in. Being a taller person, you are, you know, there could be some challenges with that. And it is an invitation into taking up space and to stepping into roles of leadership, which Pallas is encouraging us to take up space too. We're talking about being seen. Pallas was born from Jupiter's head as a full grown woman or a full grown human chanting or crying out a victorious shout. Is like so victory is like another theme of Pallas. But yeah, that kind of like, I'm here, I'm taking up space, I have a right to be here, hear my voice, this is my truth. So there's really, Pallas doesn't want us to hold back. And when I was doing the workshop series, Pallas was like, nope, you have to be seen when you are talking about me. This is not going to be an audio podcast recording, which Ceres, the first workshop, which, by the way, you were talking about the order that you were doing them. This isn't the order that these asteroids were discovered. So Ceres was the first asteroid discovered, and then Pallas. But yeah, Pallas, spending a month with her was very much saying, it's time for you to be seen. And so wherever Pallas is in your chart is an invitation to be seen. So for you, it's interesting because you have the sun and Pallas in the 8th house, right?
So yeah, Sun Pallas in the 8th.
Yeah. So there's a layering process I do in my own practice, but 8th house, we could say, is a house of esoteric wisdom. So it highlights the esoteric sides of Pallas. Being with the sun, it highlights the visibility and the victorious leadership of Pallas. So you can start to do a layering process there. I have a very similar kind of energy to you because it's Pallas and Scorpio. Scorpio is going to highlight the esoteric side of Pallas, and then the midheaven is also highlighting the importance of public appearance and leadership.
Yeah, I see so much of, I think the way that you bring this knowledge to the world, also being very associated with your Pallas and on the midheaven in Scorpio. It just feels very like, here are the words and thoughts around these esoteric things that are going to broaden people's collective consciousness that brings healing. And I very much see that as your ability to kind of speak in such a way and such a dynamic way that brings about healing for people.
Piercing power. Pallas is very direct and communication. And so even just having short little affirmations that allow you to tap into the energy is like that energy of the spear or the sword that Pallas wields. And connected to being born from the father's head or Jupiter's head is very much connected to collectively patriarchal constructs or patriarchal values. And so how are we using our esoteric wisdom in a way that helps to, we could say, dismantle our patriarchal society or to advance our modern patriarchal society towards equality, towards truth, towards fairness? So Pallas will offer vocabulary around our relationship to the structures and the society that we incarnated into.
Yeah, I think that's that's such a important conversation, and I think that it is also helpful. I think from just to speak from like a queer experience around ways that I think I grew up knowing that patriarchy, or the way that I was supposed to show up to embody patriarchy as a mad person, was just always never felt right to me. And I always kind of was just very like, something's off here. And I even from an early age, I think I was like, I don't feel like I'm a part of whatever this is. And I think that kind of dissonance has always sat with me, and your kind of, your kind of insights on that Pallas and me identifying that with Pallas Sun was like really helpful for me to understand why I always felt so disillusioned by this idea of the way that I was told I was supposed to be, or the way that I was supposed to shine in this traditional patriarchal standard. And I never connected with it. And it caused actually a lot of issues with the dynamics with my father, because, there was a lot of expectations around that. So it really helped me with my own sort of deconditioning.
Yeah. I would like to share an example of someone who has Pallas on their midheaven that they're
Besides
both,
you.
besides me, there's quite a few actually that I know, which is interesting. Sometimes like you might start to meet other people who share similar aspects in their chart, and you can get to know what that means for your little like group mind that you create. This particular person has the moon in Pisces on their midheaven, and the person is Shannon Watts, who is a Capricorn with a Pisces moon, and she's the founder of Moms Demand Action, which is a grassroots movement of mothers fighting for public safety measures that can protect people from gun violence. And she was recently named one of Time's most 100 powerful people in the world. And she is very Capricorn. The Pisces moon, that combo is Martin Luther King Jr. There is like this great compassion, but she didn't always connect to the Pisces moon. Um, and then we learn that her Pisces moon is conjunct Pallas on the midheaven. So it brings in this story of social justice warrior into the Pisces moon and into the public appearance. And it just kind of clicked everything into place. That Pallas and Pisces moon, we might say, could maybe be a musician or kind of lost in the dream world of creating poetry. But when you bring Pallas in there, we're piercing through the veil of all of that Piscean dream and fog so that we can reach universal compassion and truth.
Mm.
So, and I kind of like, I'm getting the chills talking about it now because like the asteroids just line the chart up in a way that it's like, oh, this is actually really making sense now, how to work with this Pisces moon. So I wanted to offer that as an example is sometimes the asteroids can actually, if you're feeling a little confused in your chart, it can, in a very Pallas way, offer you some crystal clear clarity of ways to navigate and communicate your truth.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good example of that. Um, and as you also talked about right now, Pallas is conjunct the sun, right? In
Mm-hmm.
Libra, and from a transit perspective. And I think that Pallas had to come in and be like, okay, are you talking about social justice enough?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we both, I feel like we just resonate with Pallas, where we could say they're prominently placed in our chart.
Yeah, yeah. And even the way, I mean, we don't have to get into that full spectrum, but even the way that you told the story about Pallas and how why she went about this was also really resonant with me as well.
Yeah. And I even think with Pallas, we could use they, them pronouns.
Hmm.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have two more asteroids if we want to check in with them. How are you feeling?
I think that it might be good maybe to, if you're cool with it, maybe do like maybe another episode on the two. I just want to give them the sort of balance that they deserve, but I also feel that we're kind of at the hour mark, so I don't want to feel like we're going too deep or that we've used enough,
Yeah.
we've used enough of space of that.
Yeah. I think this is a great stopping point. I think Ceres and Pallas is enough information for now.
I also have been sitting with these archetypes over the past 4 months, and it's been interesting and lovely to see how the ways that I see it be experienced in my own life, not just in my own internal reflections, but how I see other things happen in my life that resonate with that. So that's been some of the cooler ways that I've been able to like really embody and really explore the practice from experimental sort of way. And that's, I think, sometimes my more approach to astrology is like, okay, how do you experience this in your chart, and like how do you experience this in the world, and how you experience this from your own internal practice, and kind of getting that through what you are experiencing in the moment.
Yeah. Beautiful. Since we did connect in with Ceres, I just want to share that Scorpio season will be a great time to connect with Ceres because Ceres is currently in Scorpio. So the Scorpio new moon, which I believe is November 13th.
Mm.
Yeah, the Scorpio new moon is November 13th, and it's the Sun, Mars, Ceres, and the moon all in Scorpio together.
Ooh, that's gonna be feisty.
A little feisty, yeah, and um excavating Mars and
Mm.
Ceres together feels like kind of like digging and processing the compost pile.
As someone with a Scorpio moon, it's something that I'm in continuous evolvement of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, before we conclude, I just wanted to offer any more space or anything else you wanted to share as a reflection before we wrap this up.
Um, if you would like to stay in touch, I'm pretty active on social media. My Instagram's cosmic.cousins. I also release a podcast on each new and full moon that's called Cosmic Cousins, and it is an offering that connects you not only to astrology, but also to the body. There's a lot of somatic awareness, to spirituality, social justice, and I'll have different practitioners or musicians or artists, healers on the podcast to have conversations from a cosmic perspective.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, and be sure to follow them. I know I do, and I've been following them for quite some time, and it's been helpful on my astrology journey. And of course, you can also follow me at Cosmic Period Empowerment on Instagram. And obviously, this is part of my podcast, and check out my website for some of my offerings. But with that said, thank you so much for coming and being on the podcast with me, Jeff. This has been a wonderful conversation for my podcast YouTube channel, and I look forward to talking about the other asteroids with you.
I look forward to it too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Have a good day.